Imagine waking up in a world without antibiotics, without hand sanitizer, without even the concept of germs. A world where people drank from the same bucket, shared beds with strangers at inns, and thought bathing too often might kill you. And yet, somehow, many of them survived. Today, we're diving into one of the strangest mysteries of history. Just how strong was the immune system of medieval people? And could it actually be stronger than ours today? Stick around, because what you're about to hear may completely change the way you think about sickness, survival, and even your own body. Chapter 1. When yesterday's illness refuses to die. You might assume that you live in a better, cleaner, and safer world than the people of the Middle Ages. You might feel protected by antibiotics, vaccines, and filtered water. You might imagine that the great diseases of medieval Europe, bubonic plague, leprosy, smallpox, and dysentery, belong firmly to museum glass and dusty manuscripts. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Some of them are still here. Not preserved in textbooks, not reconstructed in a lab alive. The bacteria that wiped out entire cities in the 14th century, the infamous Yersinia pestis, better known as the Black Death, still exists, quietly inhabiting forests, rodents, and fleas. There are still reported human cases every year. And no, not just in remote corners of history-themed documentaries. In countries like the United States, Madagascar, China, and Mongolia, plague is not a myth. It waits in the ground beneath your feet. But before we get there, let's step back. Not to modern hospitals, but to the bustling, unwashed world of medieval Europe, when diseases were not just microbes. They were characters in daily life, familiar, feared, sometimes accepted like weather. You will take a journey through a world where people did not know what germs were, but felt their presence daily. And then, you'll learn which of those invisible enemies still have the power to kill a modern human. Imagine yourself walking through a 14th century European market. The air is thick with the smell of fish, sweat, manure, and roasted onions. Chickens run loose between your ankles. A stray dog carries a scrap of bread in its mouth, more bone than meat. Someone coughs beside you, not a polite modern cough, but a deep, wet heave that shakes their ribs. People don't move away. They don't even react, because everyone coughs. Illness is not shocking here. It is the background music of existence. Children carry fevers like seasonal habits. Adults walk with sores that never close. In the crowd, you might notice someone whose skin is unusually pale, or whose fingertips are blackening. No one stares. No one calls for help. The sick are not quarantined. There is nowhere to quarantine them to. Hospitals exist, but not as places of treatment. They are closer to hostels, run by monks or charitable guilds. If you were dying, you might go there not to be cured, but to be given a bed, bread, and perhaps someone to pray beside you. But here's what you must understand. Not every disease in this world is wildly contagious. Some creep slowly. Some never fully kill. Some turn bodies into living caution signs like leprosy. You have heard of leprosy, perhaps as a biblical curse or distant metaphor, but in medieval reality, it was a common and bureaucratically managed condition. Across Europe, especially in England, France, and the Low Countries, leper houses were established not as prisons, but as semi-permanent communities. A person diagnosed with leprosy might be given a special cloak, a wooden clapper, or a bell to announce their presence when traveling. They were not hated in every place. In fact, in many towns, they were legally allowed to beg without shame. They were officially recognized. Now, pause for a moment and consider. Leprosy still exists today, not metaphorically, not symbolically. Over 200,000 new cases are recorded every year worldwide, primarily in India, Brazil, and parts of Africa. Though even the United States reports occasional cases, some possibly linked to armadillos, which carry the bacteria that cause it. Mycobacterium leprae, modern antibiotics can cure it. but only if it is diagnosed. And even today, people miss the signs until the damage is done. Which raises the first question of our journey. If a medieval disease can survive 700 years of medical progress, did we really defeat it? Or did it simply wait patiently while we forgot it existed? Return now to the medieval street. You hear a cart rolling past, its wheels crunching over stones. Within it lies a man covered in a thin sheet. His face is not fully hidden. His mouth hangs open, stiff and dry. Flies explore the edges. In medieval towns, death is public. Burials happen quickly, sometimes within hours, not for spiritual reasons, but for smell. But more importantly, death is not always explained. A man might fall ill on Monday and be in the ground by Thursday, with no priest, physician, or neighbor able to tell you why. The people give names to diseases: the sweating sickness, the flux, St. Anthony's fire. But these names do not point to singular, precise causes. They are collections of symptoms. Guesswork made vocabulary, and yet strangely, many lived long lives. Not because they were healthier, but because their bodies were constantly challenged, forced to adapt to infections from birth. You did not grow up in a sanitized cradle. You were licked by dogs, breathed on by strangers, fed by hands that stirred manure an hour before. Your immune system was not a luxury. It was an ongoing war, but is that immunity real or romanticized? Could a medieval peasant survive today's world better than you could survive theirs? Or would both of you die immediately upon switching places? Before answering, let's examine a disease that even kings feared: bubonic plague. The Black Death, the Great Mortality, between 1347 and 1351. It killed up to 50% of Europe's population. Entire villages vanished from records. Monasteries lost all their scribes. Childless fields lay untended. But here's the part few people realize. The plague did not vanish after that. It kept returning over 40 times in different European regions across the next 300 years. And even now, in 2023, cases are tracked by the World Health Organization. A person today, perhaps a hunter in New Mexico, or a shepherd in Mongolia, or a farmer in Madagascar, might begin with a fever and swollen lymph nodes. They might assume it is the flu. Then the swelling becomes a hard, painful lump, the bubo. With treatment, most survive. Without treatment, over 50% still die. In medieval times, there was no treatment. In modern times, there is treatment if the healthcare system recognizes it in time. So consider this carefully. Have we conquered plague, or merely gotten better at answering its knock? And plague is not unique. Medieval diseases persist in disguised or evolved forms. Tuberculosis still kills 1.3 million people every year. Dysentery and diarrheal diseases, among the top causes of death in many countries. Anthrax, once associated with rotting carcasses on medieval roads, still infects livestock and sometimes humans. Rabies, still almost 100% fatal once symptoms appear. Exactly as in the Middle Ages, parasitic worms, less discussed, but still infect over 1 billion people globally. The difference is not that we eradicated medieval diseases. It is that some of us have the luxury of forgetting them, but memory is survival. And forgetting has consequences, so before we move on, pause with one final question. If so many medieval diseases still exist, which ones are quietly evolving, waiting for our defenses to weaken again? Chapter 2. Daily Life as Immunity Training. How dirt, animals, and disease became their vaccines. If a modern person were suddenly dropped into a medieval village, their first instinct would probably be to reach for hand sanitizer, except there wouldn't be any. There would be mud, animals, smoke, and smells. So many smells. Not bad smells, necessarily, although some certainly would be, but dense ones. The smell of wet wool hanging on a line, of fresh hay and horse sweat, of smoke from 500 chimneys rising at dawn, of open-air markets where raw meat, fish, herbs, and people all shared the same stone tables. Medieval life was full of vivid sensory layers, and almost every one of them carried microbes. But for people of the Middle Ages, this was not unsanitary. It was simply normal. And without realizing it, their bodies were constantly engaged in a full-time apprenticeship in resilience. Unlike the modern child, who may grow up in a relatively sterile home with filtered water, packaged food, and antibacterial soaps, the medieval child encountered more bacterial variety in a single morning than many modern people do in a week. They drank from wooden cups that were rinsed in basins rather than sterilized. They played outside in unpaved streets, where donkeys, dogs, and chickens had passed moments before. Infants were sometimes soothed not with toys, but by being given bread crusts or hardened cheese to chew, both of which might have spent hours sitting on an unwashed shelf. It was not reckless parenting. It was simply parenting before germ theory, and strangely, it worked. Modern science has a name for this phenomenon: the hygiene hypothesis. It suggests that exposure to bacteria and parasites in early life helps train the immune system, teaching it not just how to fight infections, but how to tolerate harmless substances as well. In other words, medieval children were vaccinated every day, not by doctors, but by life. They did not receive carefully measured syringes of weakened viruses. Instead, they received accidental microdoses of nature. Consider the household animals. Chickens roamed the yards freely, pecking between feet, clucking at kitchen doors. Cats slept on beds. Dogs wandered under tables. Even in cities, animals were everywhere. Carts rolled by carrying pigs to market. Horses drank from public fountains. Cows grazed in common pastures beside cottages. In some places, it was normal to share a roof with them. People downstairs, animals upstairs, or vice versa, depending on the country. These animals were not pets in the modern sentimental sense. They were workers and companions and microbial delivery systems. Every touch, every scratch, every shared space introduced microbes into human bodies. Today, many people avoid such exposure, and as a result, immune systems sometimes become confused, turning allergies or asthma against harmless triggers. The medieval body did not have time for that confusion. Its world was too loud, too busy, too biologically chaotic. The immune system learned focus. Food was another instructor. Bread was not sealed in plastic. It was left out on counters, covered gently with cloth or sometimes left uncovered. Cheese aged openly on wooden boards. Milk was not pasteurized. It was consumed fresh or fermented into buttermilk. Curds or soft cheeses, fermentation, now considered a health trend, was not optional. It was survival. Even water carried lessons. Wells were not perfectly filtered, and rivers were shared for washing, fishing, and sometimes waste disposal. People knew to draw water upstream rather than downstream, a folk form of sanitation. But still, the water contained life. Not all of it good. Yet even the bad contributed to a kind of layered defense. A medieval villager might not have known why one person fell ill and another did not. But inside their bodies, immune cells remembered every encounter. Parasites too were common. Fleas, lice, and worms lived with humans as uninvited guests. They were combed out, scraped off, or ignored depending on the severity. Today, parasites are viewed strictly as invaders. But in some immune studies, parasitic infections actually reduce autoimmune diseases, keeping the immune response balanced. Medieval people did not choose this symbiosis, but they lived within it. In modern cities, public health is maintained through sterilization, cleaning, disinfecting, separating. In medieval towns, public health was maintained through tolerance, adaptation, repetition, exposure. People did not avoid germs. They built lifestyles amid them. Was it always beneficial? Certainly not. Many children died before age 5, most from infections. But those who survived entered adulthood with immune systems shaped by constant practice. A medieval farmer's handshake likely carried more microbial diversity than a modern doorknob. And yet that same farmer could endure cold, wet mornings, shared cups at alehouses, and crowded feast halls without collapsing from sniffles. Their bodies had become comfortable with discomfort. Chapter 3: Plague, Pox, and Survival. Nature's harshest exam for medieval immunity. If daily life served as training, then epidemic disease was the final exam. And in the Middle Ages, the examiners were relentless. Plague, smallpox, dysentery, leprosy, influenza, pleurisy, fevers without names. Many arrived without warning. Some lingered for generations. Others swept through like wind, gone as quickly as they appeared, leaving silence and questions behind. The most famous, of course, was the Black Death. When it reached Europe in 1347, it was as though a shadow passed over the continent. From Mediterranean ports to snow-dusted villages in the north, bells rang endlessly. Entire households vanished within days. In some regions, a third to half of the population died, a scale of loss difficult to even imagine now. But death was only part of the story. The other, less often told, was survival, who lived. This was not random. It was biology. Not everyone was equally vulnerable. Some people contracted the plague and recovered. Some never fell ill at all. Studies of surviving populations have suggested that certain genetic traits, previously unnoticed, suddenly became survival factors. Individuals with stronger innate immunity, better inflammatory response control, or blood types less favorable to bacterial adhesion had higher chances of survival. Their genes, invisible, uncelebrated, became the foundation of future generations. In essence, the Black Death was a brutal filter. Those who survived were not simply lucky, they were hardened. And their descendants, which include many people alive today, inherited traces of that resilience. In fact, modern geneticists have discovered that some immune-related genes linked to inflammatory disorders today were once beneficial against plague-like illnesses. Autoimmune diseases such as Crohn's or rheumatoid arthritis, while harmful in modern times, may be echoes of ancient defenses that once saved lives. After plague came smallpox, often called the spotted death. Unlike plague, smallpox was selective but consistent. It did not kill as quickly, but it left scars, both physical and generational. Children were the most vulnerable. But again, those who survived gained lifelong immunity. Entire towns would host poxing rituals, where parents deliberately exposed their children to milder strains so that they would live through it early, rather than later when it could be more severe. Primitive? Yes, but it was also an early form of vaccination, centuries before Edward Jenner made it scientific, even war-tested immunity. Soldiers slept in crowded tents. They marched in snow, sharing water skins and wounds. Infection spread faster than arrows. Many medieval armies lost more men to disease than weapons. Yet those who did not, those who healed from infected cuts, endured fever, or withstood contaminated rations, returned home stronger. Not in spirit alone, but in white blood cells. And then there was famine. Malnutrition weakens modern bodies. Yet medieval peasants often lived on bread, cabbage, beans, ale, and occasional meat, with leaner diets than many would consider healthy today. But instead of weakening them beyond function, their bodies optimized for endurance. Their metabolism adjusted to scarcity. Their microbiome, the invisible community inside their gut, adapted to digest rough grains and fibrous roots with efficiency modern stomachs have forgotten. So were medieval immune systems superior to ours? Yes, in some ways, and no, in others, they were battle-tested. Exposed to more biological diversity. Less prone to allergic confusion. More practiced in repair rather than avoidance, but they were also unprotected. They did not have antibiotics. They did not have sterile surgeries. A simple infected tooth could still kill. A wounded leg could lead to fever. A contaminated bucket could change a village. Their immunity was powerful, but it was not invincible. Modern humans, meanwhile, are chemically armed. We have vaccines, disinfectants, medicines, sterile tools. But our immune systems, no longer trained by dirt and livestock, sometimes mistake pollen for parasites and bread for poison. So who would win in a direct contest? A medieval villager versus a modern citizen facing infection without medicine? Most likely, the medieval villager, at least for the first round. Their immune system would react faster. Their gut would process unfamiliar food more easily. Their skin would tolerate weather and exposure without overreacting. A modern person might fall into fever. A medieval one might continue plowing the field, and yet, give them both access to hospitals, vaccines, and sanitized tools, and the modern person would win. Because the strongest immune system is not one that has suffered the most, but one that can choose when to fight and when to prevent the battle altogether. If you're still with me, thank you for drifting through history with me tonight. I hope this quiet little journey helped your mind settle and your body rest. I make these calm, boring stories every day. So if you'd like more peaceful escapes like this, please consider liking the video and subscribing to Quiet, Boring Sleep. Your support helps me keep the lantern lit for the next sleepy traveler. Until then, sleep well, dream softly, and I'll meet you in the next story.